Hello and welcome back to the Speaking Mindset. I'm Professor William Parker, and before we start today, I want you to do something a little strange. I want you to think back to the last time you knew exactly what you wanted to say in English. You had the sentence sitting right there in your mind, and then nothing came out. Maybe you smiled, maybe you said 3 or 4 times. Maybe you just switched back to your own language because it felt safer. If that has ever happened to you, I want you to know something very important right now, in the first minute of this video. It is not because you don't know English. It is not because your vocabulary is too small, or your grammar is too weak, or your brain works too slowly. That freeze, that gap between thinking and speaking, has a name, and it has a cause, and today we are going to fix it together, one secret at a time. Here is a question I ask every single one of my students on their very first day of class. I ask them, how many words do you think you need to know to speak English fluently? And almost every time the answer is some huge number, 5,000 words, 10,000 words. I need to finish this vocabulary book first, then I will be ready to speak. And every single time, I tell them the same thing. You are already ready. You have been ready for a long time. What you are missing is not more words in your head. What you are missing is the bridge between the words in your head and the words that come out of your mouth. That bridge is built from very specific, very practical habits, and almost nobody teaches them properly in a traditional classroom. Today, in this video, I am going to hand you 10 of those secrets, the ones that actually change how fast, how smooth, and how natural your English sounds. Not next year, not after another textbook, but starting with your very next conversation. Let me tell you something about myself, because I think it will help you trust where this video is going. I have spent years sitting across from learners just like you, engineers who can read a technical manual in English without any trouble but panic in a 2-minute meeting. University students who score high marks on grammar tests but go silent the moment a native speaker asks them a casual question. Business professionals who write beautiful polished emails but feel their heart racing before a phone call. Every single one of them had knowledge. What they were missing was a system, a mindset, a set of secrets about how spoken English actually works. Secrets that are different from what you learn in a textbook. That is exactly what the speaking mindset is for, and that is exactly what today's video is about. Before we jump into secret number 1, let me be honest with you about something. Most videos with a title like this one give you generic advice. Practice more, watch movies, don't be afraid. That advice is not wrong, but it is not useful either, because it does not tell you how. Today is different. Every secret I give you comes with something you can do in the next 5 minutes. Something concrete, something you can practice while you are washing dishes, walking to work, or lying in bed at night. So get comfortable, maybe grab a notebook if you like to take notes, and let's begin with the very first secret, one that will completely change the way you think about your own thinking. Chapter 1, Stop Translating, Start Thinking in English. Here is the secret that changes everything else on this list, so I want to spend real time on it. If there is only one thing you take from this entire video, let it be this one, because every other secret builds on top of it. Right now, when someone asks you a question in English, what actually happens inside your head? Be honest with yourself for a second. For most learners at the intermediate level, the process looks something like this. First, you hear the question in English. Second, your brain quietly translates that question into your native language so you can understand it deeply. Third, you think about your answer in your native language, because that is the language where your thoughts feel comfortable and fast. Fourth, you translate that answer back into English, word by word, checking the grammar as you go. And fifth, finally, after all of that mental work, you speak. Do you see the problem? That is 4 full steps of extra work happening before you ever open your mouth. No wonder it feels slow. No wonder you freeze. You are not just speaking English, you are running a live translation service inside your own skull. And translation, even for professional human translators, takes time and mental energy. You are doing the work of 2 people, the thinker and the translator, and you are doing it in real time, under pressure, often with someone staring at you, waiting for an answer. That is an exhausting, unfair task to give yourself every single time you speak. The secret is not to translate faster. The secret is to remove translation from the process entirely, so that you think directly in English, the same way you think directly in your native language, without that middle step. This is what we call direct thought, and it is the single biggest shift that separates a hesitant speaker from a fluent one. Fluent speakers, even non-native fluent speakers, are not doing better translation. They have stopped translating. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Professor Parker, that sounds impossible. My brain has been thinking in my native language my whole life. How can I just switch it off? You are right that you cannot switch it off instantly, like flipping a light switch. But you can train it, gradually, the same way you trained your body to ride a bicycle. Nobody rides a bicycle perfectly on the first try, but with practice, the balance becomes automatic, and you stop thinking about pedaling or steering at all. Thinking in English works the same way. It becomes automatic, with the right kind of repeated practice. So here is exactly what to do, starting today. I want you to pick small, safe moments in your day, moments where nobody is listening, and I want you to narrate your own life in English inside your head. When you are making coffee, think, I am pouring the water now, it smells good this morning. When you are walking to the bus stop, think, it is a little cold today, I should have worn a jacket. When you are looking at your phone, think, I have 3 new messages, let me check who sent them. This might feel strange at first, even a little silly, but this simple habit is doing something enormous inside your brain. It is building direct neural pathways between your thoughts and English words, without your native language sitting in the middle as a translator. I call this technique inner narration, and I ask every one of my students to practice it for just 10 minutes a day, broken into small pieces throughout the day, rather than one long session. 2 minutes while brushing your teeth, 3 minutes while cooking dinner, 5 minutes while walking somewhere. The key is consistency, not duration. Your brain learns through repetition, not through one heroic hour-long session that you do once and then forget about for a week. There is a second exercise that works beautifully alongside inner narration, and I call it the no translation rule for simple thoughts. Here is how it works. Whenever you catch yourself translating something simple, something like, I am hungry, or this is difficult, or I like this song, stop yourself and ask, do I actually need to translate this? Simple, everyday thoughts like these do not need translation. You already know the English words. I am hungry. You knew that phrase before you even started forming the sentence in your native language. The translation step for simple thoughts like this is a habit, not a necessity. Catch yourself doing it and consciously skip the step. Go straight from the feeling to the English words. Let me give you a practical test you can try right now while watching this video. I am going to say a simple sentence, and I want you to notice how quickly the English version comes to your mind without going through your native language first. Ready? The weather is nice today. Did you understand that instantly in English without translating it? Of course you did. That is proof that your brain is already capable of direct understanding, at least for simple, familiar sentences. Now here is the real secret. Production, meaning speaking, works the same way as comprehension, meaning understanding, but it needs more repetition to become automatic. You already have direct comprehension in English for many simple ideas. Your job now is to build direct production for those same simple ideas, one sentence pattern at a time. I want to add one more layer to this secret, because I think it will help you enormously. Instead of trying to think in English about everything all at once, which is overwhelming and leads to giving up, start with categories. Pick one category per week. Week 1, think in English only about food and eating. Week 2, add your daily routine, waking up, getting ready, commuting. Week 3, add your emotions, how you feel about your day. By building category by category, you are not trying to boil the ocean. You are training specific, useful zones of your brain to work directly in English, and those zones will naturally expand and connect with each other over time. Some of my students ask me, but Professor Parker, what about complex thoughts? What about opinions, arguments, complicated ideas? That is a fair question, and here is the honest answer. For complex thoughts, in the beginning, some translation may still happen, and that is completely fine. This is not about achieving instant perfection. This is about shifting the balance. If you translate 90% of your thoughts today, and you use these techniques consistently, in a few months you might translate 60%, then 40%, then 20%. Every percentage point you shave off that translation habit is speed and confidence added directly to your spoken English. You do not need to eliminate translation completely to see dramatic improvement. You just need to reduce your dependence on it, piece by piece, day by day. Before we move to secret number 2, I want you to do one thing right now. Pause this video for just 30 seconds and think of one simple sentence about how you are feeling right now, directly in English, without translating. Go ahead, try it. That 30-second exercise is exactly the kind of repetition that builds the habit I am describing. Small, frequent, deliberate practice, done consistently, is more powerful than any textbook chapter on grammar could ever be for building spoken fluency. Chapter 2. Learn chunks, not just words. Let me ask you something. When you learn new English vocabulary, how do you usually do it? If you are like most learners, you probably have a list somewhere, maybe an app, maybe a notebook, filled with single words and their translations. Decision means this. Opportunity means that. Consider means this other thing. You memorize the word, you memorize the meaning, and you move on to the next word. This method feels productive. It feels like real studying. But I am going to tell you something that might surprise you. This method is one of the biggest reasons learners speak slowly and sound unnatural, even when they know thousands of words. Here is why. Native speakers do not build sentences by picking individual words out of a mental dictionary and gluing them together with grammar rules, one word at a time, in real time. That process would be far too slow for natural conversation. Instead, native speakers store and retrieve language in chunks, groups of words that travel together as a single unit. Phrases like make a decision, take the opportunity, as far as I'm concerned, the thing is, I was wondering if, it depends on. These are not built fresh every time someone speaks. They are pulled out, ready-made, the way you might grab a pre-made sandwich instead of baking bread from scratch every time you get hungry. When you learn only single words, you force your brain to do sentence construction in real time, every single time you speak, choosing each word, checking the grammar, checking the word order, checking the preposition. That is an enormous cognitive load, and it is exactly why fluent-sounding speech feels so far away when your vocabulary is stored word by word. But when you learn chunks, you skip that construction process for the parts of the sentence covered by the chunk. You are not building "I was wondering if you could help me" word by word, checking grammar rules as you go. You already have that entire phrase sitting ready in your memory, like a tool in a toolbox, waiting to be picked up and used instantly. This is genuinely one of the most powerful shifts you can make in how you study English, so let me show you exactly how to apply it. From today onward, whenever you learn a new word, do not stop there. Ask yourself, what chunk does this word usually appear in? If you are learning the word decision, do not just write down decision, noun, a choice you make. Instead, write down the chunks that word usually travels with. Make a decision, a tough decision, come to a decision, it's your decision. Now you have 4 ready-made tools instead of 1 raw material that you would have to build something out of, under pressure, in the middle of a conversation. Let me give you some categories of chunks that are especially valuable because they show up constantly in everyday conversation and they carry enormous weight in making you sound fluent. The first category is opinion starters. Phrases like, in my opinion, if you ask me, the way I see it, personally I think. These chunks are gold because they buy you a small amount of thinking time while you decide what to say next, and they sound completely natural, unlike an awkward silence. The second category is agreement and disagreement chunks. I couldn't agree more. That's a fair point, but I see what you mean, however. You might be right, although. Notice how these are not single words like yes or no. They are full functional units that let you respond to another person's idea smoothly, the way natives actually do it in real conversation, rather than the flat, robotic I agree or I disagree that many learners default to. The third category is what I call connector chunks, phrases that link your ideas together and make your speech flow instead of sounding like a list of disconnected sentences. On top of that, having said that, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, these chunks are doing enormous work for very little effort on your part, because once memorized, they come out instantly, and they make even simple ideas sound organized and thoughtful. The fourth category, and one of my favorites to teach, is hesitation chunks, sometimes called fluency devices. These are the phrases native speakers use constantly while they are thinking. Phrases like, let me think about that for a second. That's a good question. How should I put this? What I mean is. Learners often avoid these because they feel like they are not real language, just filler. But I want you to understand something important. These chunks are doing critical work. They give you thinking time without creating silence. And silence, more than almost anything else, is what makes a learner feel like they have lost fluency. A native speaker pausing with "let me think about that" sounds thoughtful. A learner pausing with silence sounds stuck. The chunk changes everything about how that pause is perceived, by others and by yourself. Now let me give you a practical method for building your own chunk collection, because simply knowing this theory is not enough. I want you to start what I call a chunk notebook, and it is different from a normal vocabulary notebook in one crucial way. Every single entry must be at least 3 words long, and it must be something you could say exactly as written in a real conversation without changing anything. Not happy, but I'm really happy about that. Not difficult, but it's easier said than done. Every time you watch a video, read an article, or have a conversation and you notice a chunk you like, the way it sounds, the way it flows, write it down exactly as it was said. Do not translate it word by word into your language and back. Keep it whole. Here is the second, and honestly more important, part of this method. You must practice saying the chunk out loud, multiple times, ideally in slightly different situations, so it becomes physically comfortable in your mouth. This is not an exaggeration. Speaking involves muscle memory, the muscles of your tongue, lips, and jaw, just as much as it involves mental memory. A chunk you have only read silently is not the same as a chunk your mouth has practiced producing. I ask my students to say each new chunk out loud at least 10 times across a few days in a few different example sentences before I consider it truly learned. Let me walk you through an example, live, right now, so you can see the difference this makes. Suppose you learn the chunk, I'm not really sure, but. A learner who only memorized the individual words, not, really, and sure, would have to construct this phrase from scratch every time, checking word order, checking whether really goes before or after sure, wasting precious seconds. But a learner who has drilled I'm not really sure, but as one single chunk can produce the entire phrase in the time it takes to produce one single word, because to their brain it functions as one single word. That speed difference, multiplied across an entire conversation, is the difference between hesitant, choppy English and smooth, confident English. I want to leave you with one more insight before we move on, because I think it will change how you listen to English from now on. Once you start noticing chunks, you cannot stop noticing them, and that is a wonderful thing. Turn on any English video, any podcast, any conversation, and start listening specifically for groups of words that repeat together. You will hear, at the end of the day, over and over. You will hear, to be honest with you, constantly. You will hear, the thing is, used as a transition, again and again. Once you see the pattern, English stops looking like an endless list of individual words to memorize, and starts looking like a manageable set of reusable building blocks, blocks you can start collecting and using immediately. That shift in perspective alone, seeing chunks instead of individual words, is worth more than an entire semester of traditional vocabulary study. Chapter 3, The Shadowing Secret. I want to teach you a technique now that I consider one of the most underused, most powerful tools in the entire world of language learning. It is called shadowing, and if you have never heard of it before, today might be the day that changes your English forever. If you have heard of it but never actually practiced it properly, stay with me, because I am going to show you exactly how to do it the right way, not the watered-down version that gets mentioned briefly and then forgotten. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say at the same time they are saying it, or just a half second behind, matching their words, their rhythm, their intonation, their speed, as closely as you possibly can. It is not pausing the video after each sentence to repeat it slowly and carefully. It is not translating what they said first and then saying your own version. It is speaking alongside them, like a shadow following a person's movement, always slightly behind, always matching the shape. Why does this technique work so well? Let me explain the mechanism, because understanding why something works makes you far more likely to actually stick with it. When you shadow a native speaker, you are forced to match their speed. You cannot shadow slowly, because then you would fall behind and lose the thread entirely. This means shadowing trains your mouth muscles, your tongue, your lips, your jaw, to physically produce English sounds at natural native speed, something that almost no other exercise does as directly. Most learners have brains that understand English reasonably fast, but mouths that have never been trained to produce it fast. Shadowing closes exactly that gap, the gap between comprehension speed and production speed. Shadowing also trains something even more subtle and, in some ways, even more important, prosody. Prosody is the music of a language, the rise and fall of pitch, the stress on certain words, the rhythm of stressed and unstressed syllables, the natural speed changes within a sentence. English has very particular prosody, and it is one of the biggest reasons non-native speech, even grammatically perfect non-native speech, can sound flat, robotic, or hard to follow. When you shadow, you are not just copying words, you are copying music, and that music is often the single biggest factor in whether someone perceives your English as fluent. Let me give you the exact step-by-step method, because doing this correctly matters enormously. First, choose your audio source carefully. In the beginning, choose something spoken clearly and not too fast. A podcast for learners, a clearly spoken interview, a video from a calm, articulate speaker. Avoid extremely fast, slang-heavy content at first, because your goal in the early stages is building the habit correctly, not torturing yourself with impossible material. As you improve over the weeks, you can move to faster, more natural, more casual content. Second, choose a short clip, somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes long. Longer than that becomes exhausting and unproductive for a single practice session. Shorter, focused repetition beats long, unfocused listening every time. Third, listen to the clip 2 or 3 times without speaking at all, simply absorbing the sounds, the rhythm, and the general meaning. This step is important, and skipping it is a common mistake. You need a mental map of the audio before you try to shadow it live. Fourth, and this is the core of the exercise, play the clip again, and this time, speak along with it, matching the speaker as closely as you can, even if you cannot understand or catch every single word. I want to be very clear about something here, because it surprises many of my students. Perfect accuracy is not the goal in this step. If you miss a word, do not stop, do not rewind, keep going, keep matching the rhythm and sound as best you can, and catch up on the next phrase. Stopping and restarting defeats the entire purpose, because the whole benefit comes from training continuous, real-time production. Fifth, do this 3 to 5 times with the same clip. You will notice something remarkable happening. The first time, you might only catch about half of it. The third time, you are catching more. By the fifth time, you are often shadowing the entire clip smoothly, almost like you know it by heart, because you basically do. This is the moment where the real training happens, in those repeated passes, not in the first attempt. Sixth, and this step is optional but extremely valuable if you have the courage for it. Record yourself shadowing and listen back, comparing your rhythm to the original. This can feel uncomfortable at first, hearing your own voice, but it is one of the fastest ways to notice exactly where your rhythm differs from a native speaker's rhythm, and awareness is always the first step toward improvement. I recommend starting with just 10 minutes of shadowing a day. That might sound small, but 10 minutes of genuinely focused, high-quality shadowing practice, done consistently every day, will do more for your spoken fluency in a month than hours of passive listening ever could. I have watched students transform their speaking rhythm within just a few weeks of consistent shadowing, and the change is often noticeable to other people before the student even fully notices it in themselves. Let me address a concern I hear often. Some students tell me, "Professor Parker, when I shadow, I feel like I am just imitating sounds without understanding the meaning. Is that actually useful?" And my answer is yes, absolutely, especially in the early passes. Here is why. Your brain is remarkably good at attaching meaning to sound patterns once those patterns are physically comfortable and familiar. Think about how children learn their first language. They repeat sounds and rhythms long before they fully understand every meaning, and understanding catches up naturally over time, layered on top of the sound patterns they already know how to produce. Shadowing works in a similar way for your English pronunciation and rhythm system. The sound pattern goes in first, physically, and the deeper understanding and natural usage follow. I also want to mention a variation of shadowing that I particularly like for intermediate and advanced learners, something I call selective shadowing. Instead of shadowing an entire clip continuously, you choose specific sentences or phrases that particularly impress you, maybe a way of expressing an opinion, maybe an interesting rhythm on a certain phrase, and you shadow just that one sentence 10 or 15 times in a row, until it feels completely natural in your own mouth. This technique is fantastic for absorbing specific chunks, which connects beautifully back to what we discussed in the last chapter, and for training your mouth on particularly tricky sound combinations that are common in English but perhaps uncommon in your native language. One last thing before we move to the next secret. Many learners feel embarrassed shadowing out loud, worried that someone might hear them talking to a video or a podcast like a strange person. I understand that feeling completely, but let me reframe it for you. Every single fluent second language speaker I have ever met, without exception, went through an uncomfortable practice phase that looked a little strange from the outside. Practicing your pronunciation out loud, alone in your room, shadowing a podcast, is not something to be embarrassed about. It is something to be proud of, because it means you are doing the actual work that produces real results, while other learners are still just reading grammar books, hoping fluency will arrive on its own. Chapter 4, Master Connected Speech and Linking. Now I want to teach you something that explains one of the most common frustrations I hear from learners at every level, even advanced ones. They tell me, Professor Parker, I understand English fine when I read it, and I even understand slow, clear English when I hear it, but when native speakers talk to each other normally, at full speed, I understand almost nothing. The words seem to blend together into one long sound. If that sentence describes your experience, I have wonderful news for you. What you are hearing is not a mistake in your listening ability. It is a real structural feature of spoken English called connected speech, and once you understand how it works, both your listening and your speaking will improve dramatically, often within just a few weeks of focused practice. Here is the core idea. In written English, words are separated by spaces, and it looks like each word is its own clean, separate unit. But in spoken English, native speakers do not pause between every word. Instead, they run words together according to certain very predictable patterns, blending the end of one word into the beginning of the next. This is not sloppy or lazy speech, contrary to what many learners assume. It is simply how the English sound system naturally works, and it happens in the speech of educated news anchors just as much as it happens in casual conversation between friends. Let me show you a few of the most common patterns, because once you learn to recognize them, you will start hearing them absolutely everywhere, in every piece of English audio you consume from this point forward. The first pattern is called linking with a consonant and a vowel. When a word ends in a consonant sound and the next word begins with a vowel sound, native speakers connect them smoothly, almost as if they were one word. Turn it off does not sound like four separate words. It sounds closer to turn it off, with the N and it blending together, and the T and off blending together as well. An apple sounds like an apple. Check it out sounds like check it out. This happens constantly in every kind of English speech, everywhere in the world. The second pattern is called linking with two identical or similar consonant sounds. When one word ends with a certain consonant sound and the next word begins with the same or a very similar sound, native speakers often merge them into what sounds like a single, slightly longer sound, rather than pronouncing both separately. Big game often sounds closer to B game, with the two G sounds essentially merging into one. This is a very common feature, and it is one of the reasons certain word combinations sound smoothed out compared to how they look written on a page. The third pattern, and this one surprises learners the most, is called the intrusive sound, where a small extra sound gets inserted between two words to make the transition smoother, even though that sound is not written anywhere. For example, between two vowel sounds, speakers often insert a very light W or Y sound to bridge the gap smoothly. I agree can sound like I agree. Go on can sound like go on. This tiny added sound is not something you need to memorize consciously. Rather, it is something your mouth will naturally start doing once you practice enough connected, natural speech, especially through the shadowing technique we just discussed in the previous chapter. The fourth pattern involves what is sometimes called reduction, where certain small, unstressed words shrink dramatically in casual, connected speech. Going to becomes gonna, want to becomes wanna, what are you becomes what are ye, did you becomes did ya. I know some learners feel uncomfortable using these reduced forms themselves, especially in formal contexts, and that hesitation is understandable and even reasonable. But here is the crucial point. Even if you choose not to use reduced forms heavily in your own speaking, especially in professional settings, you absolutely must be able to recognize and understand them, because native speakers use them constantly in almost every informal conversation, and if you cannot recognize them, huge portions of natural spoken English will sound like a blur to you. So how do you actually train yourself in connected speech, both for listening comprehension and for more natural speaking? Let me give you a very specific, practical exercise. Choose a short sentence, something simple like, "What do you want to do tonight?" Now, listen to a native speaker say this exact type of sentence, and notice how far it drifts from the careful, separated pronunciation you might have learned early on. It likely sounds closer to, "What do you want to do tonight?" with several sounds blending and shrinking together. Practice saying it both ways, the slow, careful, textbook way, and the fast, connected, natural way. Notice the difference physically in your mouth. This kind of contrastive practice, comparing the careful version against the natural version, builds a very clear, concrete awareness of exactly what connected speech does to a sentence. I also want to give you a listening exercise specifically designed around this concept, something I call sound hunting. Choose a short clip of natural conversational English. 30 seconds is plenty. Listen once for general meaning. Then listen again, this time specifically hunting for examples of linking, reduction, or blended sounds. Pause the moment you catch one, and try to write down both what you heard, the actual sound, and what it represents in full, careful English. Over time, this exercise trains your ear to automatically decode connected speech, the same way your eye automatically decodes messy, connected handwriting once you have enough practice reading it. One final and honestly very motivating thought on this topic. Many learners believe that mastering connected speech is only about improving their listening, but it has an equally powerful effect on your speaking fluency and how natural you sound to others. When you speak with excessive separation between every single word, carefully pronouncing each syllable distinctly, it not only sounds unnatural and slightly robotic to native ears, it also physically slows you down because your mouth is doing extra unnecessary work between every word. Learning to link your words naturally, the way native speakers do, does not just make you easier to understand and more pleasant to listen to. It also, quite simply, makes speaking English physically faster and less effortful for you. Your mouth spends less energy stopping and starting, and more energy flowing smoothly from one thought to the next, exactly the way fluent speech is supposed to feel. Chapter 5. Use filler words like a native. I want to talk about something that many English learners have been taught, wrongly, to be ashamed of: filler words. Words and sounds like well, you know, like, so, actually, I mean. If you were ever taught that a good English speaker avoids these completely and speaks in perfectly smooth, uninterrupted sentences from start to finish, I need you to unlearn that idea right now, because it is simply not how real, natural spoken English works, and clinging to it is actually holding back your fluency, not protecting it. Here is the truth. Native English speakers use filler words constantly, in almost every single sentence of natural, unscripted conversation. Listen carefully to any interview, any podcast, any casual conversation between friends, and you will hear and you know, and like, and so, scattered throughout, again and again. These are not signs of poor English. They are a completely normal, universal feature of how humans produce spoken language in real time in every language around the world, including your own native language, whether or not you consciously notice it there. Refined, so why do learners avoid filler words so strongly? Usually, it comes from a well-meaning but misguided idea from a classroom, where a teacher told students to eliminate and to sound more professional or more advanced. And in certain very formal, prepared contexts, like a scripted presentation, reducing filler words can indeed be useful. But in ordinary spontaneous conversation, the goal is not silence, it is naturalness, and eliminating filler words entirely from spontaneous speech does not actually sound more fluent. It sounds strange, robotic, and effortful, because it goes against how real human conversation naturally flows. Here is the real secret I want to teach you. Filler words are not empty noise. They are functional tools, and different filler words do different jobs. Learning to use the right filler for the right moment is a genuine fluency skill, every bit as real as learning grammar or vocabulary, and it deserves just as much deliberate practice. Let me break down some of the most useful filler words and exactly what job each one does. Well is often used at the very start of a response, especially when you are about to say something slightly complicated, or when your answer is not a simple yes or no. Well, it depends on a few things. This single word signals to the listener right away that a nuanced answer is coming, which sets expectations and makes your pause afterward feel natural rather than awkward. So often works as a way to open a new topic, wrap up an idea, or transition from one thought to another. So, basically what happened was, to sum up, this little word acts like a signpost, telling your listener that a shift is happening in the conversation, which helps them follow your thinking, even when your sentence structure is not perfectly polished. You know is often used to check whether the listener is following you, or to soften a statement, making it feel more like a shared understanding between two people, rather than a lecture. It's, kind of a difficult situation. This filler creates a sense of connection and casualness, and using it appropriately can make you sound warmer and more natural. Is frequently used to clarify or slightly correct something you just said. I think it's a good idea. It has some risks, but overall, yes. This filler gives you a graceful way to add nuance or adjust your statement without sounding like you are contradicting yourself awkwardly. Actually, often signals a small correction, a surprising fact, or a shift from what might be expected. Actually, I've never tried that before. This word adds a small amount of emphasis and personality to your sentence, making it feel more like genuine spoken reaction rather than a flat, pre-written statement. Now here is the practical exercise I want you to try. Instead of avoiding filler words out of fear, I want you to deliberately practice using 2 or 3 of them naturally in your speaking this week. Choose well, so, and you know as your starting set, since they are extremely common and useful across almost every kind of conversation. When you are practicing speaking, whether alone, with a language partner, or in your daily inner narration exercise from Chapter 1, consciously insert these fillers where they would naturally occur, especially at the start of a slightly complex answer or when you need a beat of thinking time. I also want to give you what I call the pause and fill technique, which is enormously helpful for reducing that panicked silent freeze many learners experience. The next time you are asked a question in English and you feel your mind going blank, instead of staying silent while you scramble for words, say a filler phrase first. That's a really good question. Let me think about that for a moment. Or simply, well. This buys you real thinking time, exactly the way it does for native speakers, while sounding completely natural rather than broken or stuck. The silence itself is what feels uncomfortable and signals a lack of fluency, far more than the content of what you eventually say. Fill that silence with natural filler language, and the entire feeling of the interaction changes, both for you and for the person listening to you. I want to add one important caution here, because balance matters. The goal is natural, occasional filler use, not overuse. If every single sentence is packed with like, so, well, it can start to sound cluttered rather than natural. Listen to how fluent speakers actually use fillers, usually once or twice per sentence at most, often at natural transition points, not scattered randomly throughout every clause. As with everything in this video, awareness through careful listening, combined with deliberate, moderate practice, is what builds this skill properly. Chapter 6. Chase fluency first, perfection later. I want to introduce you to an idea that once it truly sinks in, changes the entire emotional experience of speaking English. I call it the fluency first mindset, and it directly attacks one of the biggest hidden reasons learners freeze up, hesitate, and avoid speaking altogether: the fear of making a mistake. Think about how you were likely taught English in school. Most traditional classrooms are built around accuracy. Get the grammar right, get the tense right, get the preposition right, correct every error immediately. This approach makes sense for written exams, where accuracy genuinely matters and you have time to think carefully. But when this same accuracy-obsessed mindset gets applied to spoken conversation, it becomes a serious problem because it trains your brain to treat every sentence as a test you might fail, rather than a natural act of communication. Here is what actually happens inside the mind of a learner trapped in this mindset. Before speaking, they mentally check the grammar of their sentence. Is this the correct tense? Is this the right preposition? Should this verb be followed by to plus the infinitive, or the gerund form? While all this checking is happening, silently, in their head, time is passing, the conversation is moving forward, and the natural moment to speak often slips away entirely. The result, ironically, is that the obsession with getting it perfectly right ends up producing far less speech overall, and far more silence, hesitation, and anxiety than a more relaxed approach ever would. I want to offer you a different priority order, one that I have seen transform learners again and again throughout my years of teaching. The order is this: fluency first, then comprehensibility, then accuracy. Let me explain each one and why the order matters so much. Fluency means keeping your speech flowing without long, unnatural pauses, even if that means using a slightly simpler sentence, or even making a small grammar mistake along the way. Comprehensibility means that your listener can understand your basic meaning, even if your grammar or word choice is not perfect. Accuracy means getting the grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation technically correct. Notice that accuracy comes last in this list, not because it does not matter at all. It does matter, and it should keep improving over time, but because chasing accuracy first, before fluency and comprehensibility are established, actually damages both of the more important goals. Here is a very concrete example. Imagine you want to say, "If I had known you were coming, I would have prepared dinner." This is a beautifully correct, fairly advanced grammatical structure called the third conditional. If you feel confident using it in the moment, wonderful, go ahead and use it. But if reaching for that perfect grammatical structure causes you to hesitate, stumble, or freeze, a fluency-first speaker would simply say something a little simpler instead. "Oh, I didn't know you were coming. I would have cooked something if I knew." Is that second version grammatically perfect? No, not quite. But is it fluent, natural sounding in rhythm, and completely, immediately understandable? Absolutely yes. And that combination, fluent and understandable, is worth far more in a real conversation than a hesitant, perfectly correct sentence that takes 15 extra seconds and several awkward pauses to construct. I often tell my students something that surprises them at first. Mistakes are not the enemy of fluency. Hesitation is the enemy of fluency. A small grammar mistake, spoken confidently and smoothly, in the flow of a natural conversation, is almost always more effective communication, and frankly sounds more fluent to a listener than a grammatically perfect sentence delivered with long pauses, restarts, and visible anxiety. Native speakers make small grammar mistakes constantly in casual conversation too, mixing up who and whom, saying less instead of fewer, starting a sentence one way and finishing it another. Nobody notices or cares because the conversation flows naturally and the meaning comes through clearly. Give yourself the same grace you would automatically give a native speaker. So how do you actually train this mindset shift in practice? Here is an exercise I love, and I use it with almost every student I teach at every level. I call it the 60-second talk. Choose a simple topic, something ordinary like my morning routine, or a movie I recently watched, or my plans for the weekend. Set a timer for 60 seconds. Speak about that topic continuously for the entire 60 seconds, without stopping, without going back to correct yourself, without pausing to search for the perfect word. If you make a mistake, or if you cannot find a word, just keep going, use a simpler word, rephrase on the fly, but never stop the flow of speech. When the 60 seconds is over, you are done. That is the entire exercise. The purpose of this exercise is to train your brain and your mouth to prioritize continuous flow over perfect accuracy, deliberately, through repeated practice until it starts to feel natural rather than uncomfortable. I recommend doing this exercise once a day, choosing a new topic each time, gradually increasing the time from 60 seconds to 90 seconds, then to 2 minutes, as it becomes more comfortable. You will notice something remarkable happening after a week or two of consistent practice. The fear of making a mistake in front of someone starts to genuinely shrink because you have been rehearsing exactly this scenario, speaking imperfectly but continuously in a low-stakes, private setting, again and again. I want to close this chapter with a reframe that I think is genuinely life-changing for a lot of learners. Stop thinking of English mistakes as failures to be avoided. Start thinking of them as data points that show you exactly where to focus your future study. Every mistake you make while speaking freely is valuable information, information you would never have discovered if you had stayed silent, safely avoiding any risk of error. The learners who improve the fastest are almost never the ones who speak the least and make the fewest mistakes. They are the ones who speak the most, make plenty of mistakes along the way, notice patterns in those mistakes over time, and keep speaking anyway, with growing confidence, every single day. Chapter 7. Talk to yourself, the secret practice. I am about to recommend something that might feel a little embarrassing, at least at first, but I promise you, it is one of the most effective, most underrated fluency tools available to any English learner, anywhere in the world, at any level. I want you to start talking to yourself, out loud, in English, regularly, on purpose. I know how that sounds. Many students laugh nervously the first time I suggest this, imagining themselves standing alone in their room, talking to nobody, feeling a little foolish. But let me reframe this for you completely, because once you understand why it works, the slight awkwardness fades away very quickly, replaced by genuine excitement about how much progress it produces. Here is the core problem that self-talk solves beautifully. Most learners get plenty of input, meaning they listen to English and read English regularly, but they get very little actual output practice, meaning they rarely produce spoken English themselves, especially not without a partner, a teacher, or some kind of pressure and audience. This creates a massive imbalance. Your comprehension improves steadily through all that listening and reading, but your production, your actual speaking muscles, both mental and physical, stay underdeveloped because they simply are not being exercised nearly as often. Self-talk is the single most accessible, always available way to close that gap, because it requires no partner, no scheduling, no cost, and no risk of embarrassment in front of another person. You can do it anywhere, anytime, completely alone. Let me give you several specific, practical ways to use self-talk, because just talk to yourself is a little too vague to actually act on effectively. The first method builds directly on the inner narration idea from Chapter 1, but takes it one crucial step further from silent thinking to actual spoken sound. As you go about your day, describe what you are doing out loud in a quiet voice if you need privacy, or in full voice if you are alone at home. I'm opening the fridge to see what I have for breakfast. There's not much here actually. I should go grocery shopping later today. This might feel strange for the first few days, but within a week or two, most of my students report that it starts to feel completely natural, even enjoyable, almost like having a quiet, friendly companion narrating their day alongside them. The second method is what I call the imaginary conversation. Pick a real or realistic scenario, something you might actually face, like a job interview, a phone call to a customer service line, a conversation with a new coworker, or even an argument you wish you had handled differently. Speak both sides of the conversation out loud, playing both roles yourself. This exercise is remarkably powerful because it forces you to practice not just speaking, but the specific vocabulary and phrases relevant to real situations you are likely to encounter in a completely safe, private, low-pressure environment before you ever need to use that language for real. The third method is the daily debrief, and I particularly love this one because it builds a genuinely useful, sustainable long-term habit. At the end of each day, spend 2 or 3 minutes talking through your day out loud, in English, as if you were telling a friend about it. Today was pretty busy. I had a meeting in the morning that went longer than expected, and then I had lunch with a colleague, which was nice because we don't usually get much time to talk. This exercise does double duty. It builds fluency through consistent daily speaking practice, and it also builds a valuable long-term habit of reflection, which many people find genuinely beneficial for their overall well-being, quite separate from the language learning benefits. The fourth method is opinion practice, and this one is particularly valuable for learners preparing for interviews, presentations, or any situation where they need to express and defend a viewpoint clearly. Choose a simple topic and speak your genuine opinion about it out loud for 1 or 2 minutes, as if you were explaining your view to someone who disagreed with you. I think remote work is generally a good thing because it gives people more flexibility, although I understand it can make teamwork a bit harder sometimes. This trains the specific skill of organizing and defending an argument in real time, under your own control, without external pressure, which makes it far easier to do this same thing later, when real pressure from a real conversation is present. I want to address the practical question of when and where to actually do this, because good intentions without a specific plan tend to fade away within a week. I recommend attaching self-talk practice to an existing daily habit, something you already do automatically every single day, so the new habit has an easy trigger to hook onto. Many of my students choose their commute if they walk or drive alone. Others choose their shower time, or the time spent cooking dinner, or a short walk they take after lunch. The specific moment does not matter nearly as much as the consistency, so pick something realistic for your actual daily life and commit to it, even if it is only 5 minutes a day, and build from there once it feels comfortable. One final, important point about self-talk. Some students worry that practicing alone will teach them bad habits, since there is no teacher or native speaker there to correct their mistakes in the moment. I understand this concern, but I want to reassure you that it is far less of a problem than it seems, especially when you combine self-talk with the other techniques in this video, particularly shadowing from Chapter 3, which continuously exposes you to correct native pronunciation and rhythm alongside your own independent practice. Self-talk builds fluency and speaking confidence. Shadowing and active listening build accuracy and natural sound. Together, these techniques cover both sides of the equation beautifully, and neither one alone is meant to be your only source of practice. I want to challenge a common assumption many learners hold, often without even realizing it. The idea that listening and speaking are two completely separate skills, practiced through completely separate activities. In reality, listening, done the right way, is one of the most powerful, most direct paths to improving your speaking, and I want to show you exactly why, along with exactly how to listen in a way that actually builds your speaking fluency, rather than simply passing time. Let me start by distinguishing between two very different kinds of listening, because this distinction matters enormously. The first kind is passive listening, which is what most learners actually do most of the time, even when they believe they are studying through listening. Passive listening means having English audio playing in the background, a podcast, a show, a video, while your attention drifts elsewhere. Maybe you are also checking your phone, maybe you are half thinking about something else entirely. Passive listening is not useless. It does provide some background exposure to the sound and rhythm of English, but its impact on your actual speaking ability is quite limited because your brain is not deeply, actively engaging with the language while it happens. The second kind is active listening, and this is where the real transformation for your speaking fluency happens. Active listening means giving English audio your full, focused attention and doing something with what you hear, rather than simply letting it pass through your ears. Let me show you exactly what this looks like in practice, because the specific technique matters just as much as the general intention. Here is my favorite active listening exercise, and I call it Predict and Confirm. Choose a short clip of conversational English, maybe an interview or a natural dialogue. Play just a small portion, perhaps 10 or 15 seconds, and then pause. Before continuing, actively predict, out loud if possible, what you think the speaker might say next, based on the context and the natural patterns of English conversation you have absorbed so far. Then, play the next portion, and check whether your prediction was close. This exercise does something remarkable. It forces your brain to actively engage with the structure and logic of spoken English, rather than passively absorbing it. And this active engagement, this making of predictions about language, is directly connected to your ability to actively produce language yourself, because both skills draw on the same underlying sense of how English sentences and conversations naturally unfold. A second powerful active listening exercise is what I call reaction listening. As you listen to a conversation or a monologue, pause periodically and speak your own reaction out loud in English to what you just heard. If someone in a podcast says something you agree with, pause and say out loud, "Yeah, I totally agree with that, because," and finish the thought yourself. If they say something surprising, pause and say, "Wow, I didn't expect that. I thought." This technique turns a one-way listening activity into something closer to an actual two-way conversation, and it gives you direct, immediate speaking practice tied closely to real, natural, native English content, which is enormously valuable compared to speaking practice built around artificial textbook dialogues. A third exercise, particularly useful for building vocabulary and chunks that connect directly back to Chapter 2, is what I call listen and log. As you listen actively to a piece of content, keep a notebook nearby, and every time you hear a phrase, chunk, or expression that catches your attention, something you think, "I want to be able to say that myself," pause the audio and write it down immediately before you forget it. Do not worry about interrupting your listening flow to do this. The goal here is not maximizing how much content you consume, it is maximizing how much useful, speakable language you actually capture and can later practice using yourself through the chunk notebook method we discussed earlier. I want to give you some practical guidance on choosing listening material, because this choice matters more than many learners realize. Choose content that is genuinely interesting to you personally, not just content that is labeled as educational or for English learners. Your engagement and attention, driven by real interest, dramatically increases how deeply your brain processes and retains the language you hear. If you love cooking, listen to English cooking videos. If you love football, listen to English football commentary and analysis. If you are interested in psychology, listen to English psychology podcasts. The specific topic matters less than your genuine, sustained interest in it, because that interest is what keeps you actively listening, rather than letting your attention drift into passive mode after just a few minutes. I also want to encourage you to choose content that is just slightly above your current comfort level, not content that is either too easy, where you understand everything effortlessly and are not being challenged at all, or too difficult, where you understand almost nothing and quickly become frustrated and give up. There is a concept in language learning, sometimes described as comprehensible input, and the sweet spot is content where you understand the large majority of what you hear comfortably, but still encounter a reasonable amount of new or challenging language that stretches your ability a little further. This balance keeps you engaged, keeps you learning, and avoids both boredom on one side and overwhelming frustration on the other. Before we move to the next secret, I want to leave you with one final thought, connecting everything in this chapter together. Every single technique for active listening that I have described today has one thing in common. It transforms listening from a passive activity into an active rehearsal for speaking. When you predict what comes next, when you react out loud, when you log useful phrases for later practice, you are not simply absorbing English, you are actively training the exact same mental and physical systems that you use when you speak. This is precisely why some of the most fluent non-native English speakers I have ever met describe themselves, somewhat surprisingly, as having learnt to speak largely through how they learnt to listen. Chapter 9. Kill the Fear, the Confidence Mindset. I have taught English to thousands of students over the years, and I can tell you, with complete honesty and confidence, that the biggest barrier to fluency for the vast majority of learners is not grammar, it is not vocabulary, it is not pronunciation. The biggest barrier, by far, is fear. Fear of making a mistake in front of someone, fear of being judged, fear of sounding foolish, fear of the silence that follows a question you are not sure how to answer. If everything else in this video felt useful but this fear still lives inside you, unresolved, none of those other techniques will reach their full potential, because fear has a very specific, very damaging effect on the brain that actively works against fluency. Let me explain the science behind this, briefly, because understanding it changes how you relate to your own fear. When you feel anxious or afraid, your brain activates what is sometimes called the stress response, and this response prioritizes survival functions over higher-level cognitive functions like language processing, memory retrieval, and complex problem solving. In simple terms, fear literally makes it harder for your brain to access the English words and grammar you already know. This is precisely why you might speak beautifully, comfortably, and correctly when you are alone practicing, but suddenly feel your mind go completely blank the moment a real person is standing in front of you, waiting for your answer. It is not that the knowledge disappeared. It is that fear temporarily blocked your access to it. So how do we deal with this? I want to give you several concrete strategies, because simply telling you "don't be afraid" is about as useful as telling someone "don't be nervous" before a job interview. It rarely works on its own. Real change requires specific tools and consistent practice. The first strategy is what I call exposure in small doses. Fear of speaking, like most fears, tends to shrink through repeated, gradual exposure to the exact thing you are afraid of, rather than through avoidance. If you avoid speaking English with real people because it feels frightening, that fear does not fade away on its own over time. It typically stays the same, or even grows stronger, because avoidance actually reinforces fear rather than reducing it. Instead, I encourage my students to seek out small, low-stakes speaking opportunities regularly, deliberately, even when it feels uncomfortable. This might mean speaking with a language exchange partner online for just 10 minutes. It might mean ordering food in English when you have the option, even if your own language is also available. It might mean joining a low-pressure conversation group. The specific activity matters less than the principle. Small, repeated exposure, done consistently, gradually rewires your brain's fear response around English speaking, the same way repeated safe exposure reduces almost any fear over time. The second strategy is reframing what a mistake actually represents. I want you to try a specific mental exercise with me right now. Think about the last time you heard someone speaking your native language with a foreign accent, making occasional small grammar mistakes, but communicating a genuine, interesting idea. Did you judge them harshly? Did you think less of them as a person? Or did you likely feel something closer to respect, maybe even admiration, for the courage and effort it takes to communicate in a language that is not your own? Most people, when they honestly reflect on this, realize they feel respect, not judgment, toward non-native speakers making an effort. And yet, so many learners assume the reverse is true when the situation is flipped, imagining that native English speakers are silently judging their every mistake. In reality, most native speakers are simply glad to be communicating with you, focused on the conversation and the connection, not quietly grading your grammar in their head. The third strategy involves separating your identity from your performance in any single conversation. Many learners fall into a trap of thinking, if I make a mistake speaking English, it means I am bad at English, treating a single moment of imperfect performance as a permanent judgment on their overall ability or worth. I want you to actively resist this thinking pattern. A single mistake in a single conversation is simply a data point, a small piece of feedback, nothing more. It says nothing permanent about your overall ability, your intelligence, or your worth as a person. Fluent speakers of every language, including their own native language, make small mistakes constantly, correct themselves, and move on without a second thought. Give yourself that same permission. The fourth strategy is preparation as a confidence tool, not as a fluency crutch. I know I emphasized spontaneous, unscripted speaking practice earlier in this video, particularly in Chapter 6, and that remains genuinely important. But there is also real value in light preparation for situations you know are coming: a job interview, an important phone call, a presentation. Preparing does not mean memorizing a rigid script word for word, which tends to fall apart the moment the conversation goes slightly off track from what you expected. Instead, prepare key vocabulary, a few useful chunks relevant to the situation, and a general sense of what you want to communicate. This kind of light preparation reduces anxiety significantly because it removes some of the uncertainty from the situation, while still leaving you flexible enough to respond naturally to whatever actually happens in the real conversation. The fifth strategy, and one I consider especially important, is building what I call a success log. Most learners, when they think back over their language learning journey, focus almost entirely on their failures and embarrassing moments, the times they froze, the times they were misunderstood, the times they felt foolish. This selective memory quietly reinforces fear over time. I ask my students to do the opposite: actively keep a written record, even a short one, of moments when their English worked well, a conversation that flowed smoothly, a compliment someone gave them, a moment when they expressed something complicated and were understood clearly. Review this log regularly, especially before a situation that makes you nervous. This deliberately shifts your internal evidence base toward "I am capable of this," which is a far more useful belief to carry into a conversation than "I always freeze up and fail." I want to close this chapter with something I tell every single one of my students in almost every class, because I believe it deeply. Confidence in speaking English does not arrive as a finished product before you start speaking. It is not something you wait to feel completely before you begin. Confidence is built through the act of speaking itself, gradually, conversation by conversation, mistake by mistake, small success by small success. You do not need to feel fully confident to start. You need to start imperfectly, repeatedly, and the confidence follows as a natural result of that consistent action, almost every single time, for almost every learner who commits to the process. Chapter 10. Build a daily fluency habit. We have covered 9 powerful, specific techniques so far in this video: thinking directly in English, learning language in chunks, shadowing native speakers, mastering connected speech, using filler words naturally, prioritizing fluency over perfect accuracy, talking to yourself, listening actively, and managing the fear that holds so many learners back. Now, for our 10th and final secret, I want to address something that ties all of these techniques together and honestly determines whether any of them actually produce lasting results in your life: consistency, built through a genuine, sustainable daily habit. Here is a truth I have observed over and over throughout my teaching career, without exception. Learners who practice English speaking for 15 focused minutes every single day almost always progress faster and far more sustainably than learners who occasionally practice for 3 intense hours once a week, or worse, once a month. This might seem counterintuitive at first, since 3 hours is clearly more total time than 15 minutes times 7 days, which comes to just under 2 hours a week. But total time is not actually the most important factor in building fluency. Consistency and frequency matter more, because spoken language is fundamentally a physical and neurological skill, closer to playing a musical instrument or an athletic movement than to memorizing historical facts for an exam. And physical, neurological skills are built through frequent, spaced repetition, not through occasional, intense cramming sessions, no matter how focused those sessions might be. So let me help you build a genuinely realistic daily fluency habit, something you can actually sustain for months, not just for one enthusiastic week before it fades away like so many good intentions do. I want to give you a simple structure, something I call the 15-minute fluency routine, built directly from the techniques we have covered throughout this video. Minutes 1 through 3, warm up with shadowing. Choose a short clip, something you have perhaps used before, and shadow it 2 or 3 times, waking up your mouth muscles and your ear for natural English rhythm, exactly as we discussed in Chapter 3. Minutes 4 through 7, active listening with reaction. Listen to a short piece of new content and practice the predict and confirm or reaction listening techniques from Chapter 8, actively engaging with the language rather than passively letting it play in the background. Minutes 8 through 11, self-talk practice. Choose one of the self-talk methods from Chapter 7, perhaps the daily debrief, or an imaginary conversation relevant to something coming up in your life, and speak out loud continuously, applying the fluency first mindset from Chapter 6, keeping your speech flowing even through small mistakes and imperfect moments. Minutes 12 through 15, chunk review and expansion. Spend your final few minutes reviewing chunks from your notebook discussed in Chapter 2, saying them out loud a few times each, and if you encountered any new useful chunks during today's listening practice, add them to your collection now, while they are still fresh in your mind. This entire routine takes just 15 minutes, which almost anyone can find room for in their day, even during a genuinely busy schedule, whether that means waking up 15 minutes earlier, using part of a lunch break, or practicing during a commute if you are walking or on public transportation. The specific timing and order can flex to fit your life and your preferences, but the core principle remains: touch multiple fluency skills briefly and consistently, every single day, rather than deeply but rarely. I want to address something honestly, because I think it matters enormously for long-term success. Motivation naturally fluctuates for every single learner without exception, and building a sustainable habit cannot depend on feeling highly motivated every single day. Some days you will feel excited and energized about practicing English. Other days you will feel tired, busy, or simply uninterested. This is completely normal, and it happens to every learner at every level throughout their entire language learning journey. The secret to consistency is not maintaining high motivation every single day, which is genuinely impossible for anyone over a long period of time. The secret is making the habit so small and so simple that you can complete it even on your lowest motivation days, without requiring a great burst of willpower or enthusiasm to get started. This is why I specifically recommend 15 minutes rather than a longer session for your daily baseline. 15 minutes feels genuinely achievable even on a difficult, exhausting day, in a way that 60 minutes simply does not. And here is something wonderful that happens once you commit to this smaller, more sustainable target. You will often find that once you actually begin, once you are a few minutes into your shadowing or your self-talk practice, you naturally want to continue longer, because engaging with the language activates genuine interest and momentum. But even on the days when 15 minutes truly is all you have, or all you can manage, that is completely, genuinely enough to maintain steady, real progress over time. Showing up consistently, even briefly, beats sporadic intensity almost every single time when it comes to building any long-term skill. I also want to encourage you to track your practice, even in a very simple way, because tracking creates a visible record of consistency that becomes remarkably motivating on its own. This does not need to be complicated. A simple check mark on a calendar for each day you complete your practice is genuinely enough. Over time, watching that visual streak grow becomes its own source of motivation, and most people find they do not want to break a growing streak, even on days when their initial motivation for practicing English specifically feels low. The streak itself becomes the reason to show up, alongside your original reasons for learning English in the first place. Finally, I want you to give yourself real permission to adjust this habit as your life changes and as your English improves. Perhaps after a few months, 15 minutes starts to feel too short, and you naturally want to expand to 20 or 30 minutes daily. Wonderful. Follow that natural growth. Perhaps during an especially busy week, you can only manage 5 minutes some days. That is also completely fine and far better than skipping entirely. The goal is not rigid, perfect adherence to one specific routine forever. The goal is building a flexible, sustainable relationship with daily English practice, one that survives the natural ups and downs of a real busy life, because a habit that survives your busiest, most difficult weeks is infinitely more valuable over the long run than a perfect routine that only works when everything else in your life is calm and easy. Conclusion: your next step starts now. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground together in this video, so let me bring it all together for you, clearly and simply, before we finish. Secret number 1 was learning to think directly in English, removing the exhausting, slow translation step between your thoughts and your words. Secret number 2 was learning language in chunks, ready-made phrases, rather than isolated words that must be assembled from scratch every single time you speak. Secret number 3 was shadowing, training your mouth and your sense of rhythm by speaking alongside native speakers in real time. Secret number 4 was mastering connected speech, understanding and eventually producing the natural linking, blending and reduction that defines how English actually sounds when it is spoken quickly and naturally. Secret number 5 was embracing filler words as genuine functional tools rather than avoiding them out of a misguided fear of sounding unprofessional. Secret number 6 was adopting a fluency-first mindset, prioritizing continuous, flowing speech over anxious, hesitant perfection. Secret number 7 was talking to yourself regularly, building consistent, low-pressure speaking practice into your everyday life. Secret number 8 was listening actively, transforming ordinary listening time into direct, powerful rehearsal for your own speaking. Secret number 9 was addressing the fear that quietly blocks so many learners from accessing the English they already know. And secret number 10 was building a small, sustainable, genuinely consistent daily habit that ties every single one of these techniques together into lasting, real progress over time. I want to leave you with one final thought before you go. Every single learner who eventually became fluent, without exception, started exactly where you are right now, watching a video like this one, hoping that today might be the day something finally clicks and changes. The difference between the learners who eventually reach fluency and the learners who stay stuck for years, sometimes decades, is almost never natural talent, and it is almost never intelligence. The difference is simply this: the learners who succeed actually apply what they learn, consistently, starting today, rather than collecting more and more information while waiting for some perfect future moment to begin. So here is my genuine challenge to you, right now, before you close this video and move on to whatever comes next in your day. Choose just one single technique from everything we discussed today, just one, whichever one felt most exciting or most relevant to you personally. Maybe it is the inner narration technique from chapter 1, maybe it is starting a chunk notebook from chapter 2, maybe it is your very first shadowing session from chapter 3. Whichever one you choose, I want you to practice it today, in the next hour if at all possible, while the ideas are still fresh and vivid in your mind. Not tomorrow, not next week when you have more time, today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here on The Speaking Mindset. I am Professor William Parker, and I genuinely believe, based on everything I have seen across years of teaching, that fluent, confident English is absolutely within your reach, not someday in some distant future, but starting with the very next conversation you have. If this video helped you, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue this journey together, and I will see you in the next lesson. Until then, keep speaking, keep practicing, and keep believing in your own progress. You are far closer to fluency than you think.